Surgical evidence. The evidence supporting surgical decision-making comes in many diverse forms. At one end of the spectrum, evidence is simply based on the empirical impression that a specific practice makes physiologic sense and seems to work well. Much of what surgeons do in practice falls into this category and has not been formally tested. But at the other end of the spectrum, evidence has accumulated from multiple well-designed and conducted randomized clinical trials with consistent and reproducible results. The task of the evidence-based surgeon is to judge the reliability of scientific evidence and select practices that conform to the best available evidence. Several different rubrics have been created to evaluate and determine study hierarchies or levels of evidence. These systems provide a method to judge the strength of scientific evidence, ranging from sources that are most reliable to those that are least sure. Although it is understood that not all surgical practices can be subjected to the highest levels of scientific scrutiny, surgeons are advised to base as many of their practices as possible on evidence gleaned from studies at the high end of the evidence hierarchy. This process is aided by several established systems for grading evidence. One established hierarchy is the Levels of Evidence system, popularized by the U.S. Preventive Medicine Task Force, USPMTF. 0.31 The USPMTF assigns evidence certainty at one of three levels, high, moderate, and low, on the basis of 6 critical appraisals, and has become part of the vernacular for clinicians across all medical specialties. Well-designed and conducted RCTs are frequently referenced to as Level 1 evidence. When the USPMTF system was originally released, there was debate given that the system simply identified the design of the study from which the evidence was drawn but did not describe important factors that influence the quality of evidence. 0.32 For example, a randomized double-blind placebo-controlled trial with 20,000 subjects would be awarded the same grade in the USPMTF system as an unblinded randomized trial with 50 subjects. And the latter trial would, in turn, be graded higher than a well-designed, multi-institution, prospective cohort study with 10,000 subjects. In response to these criticisms, changes were subsequently made to the USPMTF grading system in 2012 to take into account factors other than study design, such as quality, consistency, and completeness. 0.33. Another system for grading evidence that takes into account study quality and consistency was developed by the Grading, Recommendations, Assessment, Development, and Evaluation, Grade, Working Group, Table 8.3. 0.34. 35 Grade has developed a structured scoring process for determining whether evidence should be downgraded or upgraded based on different study characteristics. For example, a multicenter RCT executed with poor allocation concealment and high attrition would be downgraded by the GRADE system from high evidence quality to moderate or even low evidence quality. In comparison, a single-center RCT with a large effect size or a dose-response gradient could be upgraded from moderate to high evidence quality. The updated USPMTF grading system uses similar criteria as grade for determining when evidence quality should be increased. Decreased. Table 8.4. However, it is recognized that no single grading system is perfect, and surgeons are required to judge the quality and applicability of scientific evidence for themselves. Evaluating study quality scientific evidence from surgical outcomes and health services research relies on two important inferences. The first inference is that the observed outcome is the result of some specific intervention and cannot be attributed to some alternative explanation. When conclusions are believable and this inference is deemed true, the study is considered to have internal validity. The second inference is that study results are relevant to scenarios outside the study where the surgeon seeks to implement the practice. In other words, do the study results apply to real-world clinical practice? The extent to which this is true is called external validity or generalizability. Whereas internal validity relies on how well the study is conducted and the results analyzed, external validity relies on how well the study plan reflects the clinical question that inspired it and how well the study's conclusions apply to scenarios outside the study. Poor external validity can also refer to the difference between an intervention's efficacy, i.e., how well it works when applied perfectly, and its effectiveness, i.e., whether it has the same effect when applied generally in an uncontrolled environment. Internal validity. Assessing the internal validity of a study requires an understanding of the potential influence of bias, confounding, and chance on the study results. Chance refers to the unpredictable randomness of events that might mislead researchers, whereas bias refers to systematic errors in how study subjects were selected or assessed. In comparison, confounding refers to differences in the comparison groups, other than the intended exposure, that lead to differences in outcomes. Sources of bias. There are multiple sources of bias that might impact the surgical outcomes or health services research study. 36 Bias refers to a systematic problem with a clinical study that results in an inaccurate estimate of the differences in outcomes between comparison groups. While there are several forms of bias that arise in outcome studies, two general types are most common: selection bias and measurement bias. The former results from errors in the choice of study subjects, whereas the latter results from errors in the way information about exposures or outcomes, or other pertinent data, is obtained. Selection bias refers to any imperfection in the selection process that results in either the wrong types of subjects, i.e., people who are not typical of the target population, or a sample of subjects that for some reason, unrelated to the intervention, is more likely to have the outcome of interest. For example, paid volunteer subjects may be more motivated to comply with treatment regimens and report favorable results, resulting in an overestimate of the effect of an intervention. This would affect both internal validity, inference about the size of the effect, and external validity, generalizability to other populations. When assessing the validity of scientific evidence, surgeons must carefully consider the characteristics of the subject selected for study. Measurement bias refers to problems caused by the way information about outcomes or other pertinent data are obtained. For example, in a study of sexual function after surgery for open abdominal aortic aneurysm, subjects may report symptoms differently during an in-person interview than they would if mailed an anonymous survey. As another example, asking surgeons to assess surgical site infection outcomes in their own patients might result in erroneous reported rates as compared to surgical site infection rates reported by hospital epidemiologists. Retrospective studies, in particular, are prone to a variety of types of measurement bias. For example, recall bias may occur because of subject selective memory of past events, and ascertainment bias may occur if the outcome is likely to influence how hard observers look for information about exposures. Sources of measurement bias may be subtler than selection bias and require careful attention to reported study methods. Efforts to control measurement bias include blinding, not telling the subject or assessor what intervention was performed, and prospective study design. Confounding. Confounding refers to differences in outcomes that occur because of differences in the baseline risks of the comparison groups. These differences may occur due to selection bias that distributes risk factors known as confounding variables unevenly between comparison groups. Confounding variables influences both the outcome variable and exposure variable, causing a spurious association. For example, a comparison of mortality after open versus laparoscopic colectomy might be skewed because of the greater likelihood of open colectomy being performed as an emergency procedure in critically ill patients with perforation. In this example, the severity of the illness is a confounder in the observed association between mortality and surgical approach. In evaluating the strength of evidence in a published study, readers must assess how well the researchers accounted for the potential effect of confounding. Confounding can be minimized in several ways, in both the design of the study and the analysis of the study's results. In the design of a study, confounding is most effectively addressed with randomization. When subjects are randomized, potentially confounding variables, both recognized and unrecognized, are likely to be evenly distributed across comparison groups. Thus, whereas the baseline rate of outcomes in the entire cohort might be influenced by these factors, the differences across comparison groups are less likely to be affected. When randomization is not practical, restriction or matching can be used to prevent confounding. Restriction refers to the tight control of study entry criteria, for example, only enrolling patients undergoing elective surgery and excluding emergent procedures. However, restrictive entry criteria can sometimes limit generalizability. In comparison, matching refers to using a comparison group of unexposed, control, subjects who are identical to the exposed, case, subjects across a set of characteristics, e.g., age, sex, residence, that have the potential to result in confounding. In addition to minimizing confounding through good study design, confounding can also be addressed during the analytic phase of a study with statistical risk adjustment techniques. The most common technique is multivariate regression analysis, including linear and logistic regression models. Logistic regression models are used when the outcome variable is binary, whereas linear regression is used when the outcome is continuous. Both of these approaches involve taking into account differences in the prevalence of recognized confounders across comparison groups. However, statistical risk adjustment has several important limitations. First, only recognized confounders can be addressed in the regression model. Second, every potential confounding variable added to a statistical model decreases the model's statistical power and thereby increases the chance of resulting in a false negative result, i.e., type 2 error. Third, regression model estimates are not very reliable when there are very few outcome events. As a rule of thumb, logistic regression must have at least 10 outcome events for every variable adjusted in the model, whereas linear regression requires 10 to 15 outcomes per variable included in the model to prevent overfitting. 37. 38 other analytic techniques used to address confounding include stratification, subanalyzers in which subjects with similar risk profiles are compared, and propensity score risk adjustment. 39 The latter technique addresses the problem created by unequal chances of receiving treatment caused by differences in health characteristics. In an observational study of the outcomes of a given treatment, a propensity score is a scalar summary of all observed confounders that predict the probability of receiving the treatment. Propensity scores are typically calculated using multivariate regression models and are used as the basis for stratified analysis or for matching cases and controls in observational studies. Finally, another more complicated technique used to limit the effect of confounding is instrumental variable, IV, analysis. An IV approach involves studying the effect of a given exposure on outcomes by comparing groups with different levels of a third factor, i.e., the IV, that is highly correlated with the exposure but does not independently affect the outcome. For example, a study evaluating the effects of catheterization and revascularization on mortality following acute myocardial infarction would be prone to confounding related to differences in the baseline health characteristics of the populations receiving or not receiving these treatments. To limit this potential source of confounding, researchers studied the effect of receiving catheterization versus no catheterization, the exposure groups, on mortality after myocardial infarction, the outcome, by comparing groups of patients living at different distances from hospitals providing these services, the IV. 40 The researchers assumed that potentially confounding health characteristics would be distributed randomly geographically and that geographic distance would affect mortality only indirectly. Through its correlation with access to treatment. In this way, they used distance to pseudo-randomize their study population to different levels of treatment for acute myocardial infarction. Hypothesis testing in clinical studies that compare outcomes between two or more treatment groups. The underlying assumption that no difference exists between groups is called the null hypothesis. Erroneous conclusions with regard to the null hypothesis can sometimes occur by chance alone. There are two types of chance-related errors, type 1 and type 2. Type 1 errors, also called alpha errors, occur when researchers erroneously reject the null hypothesis, that is, infer that there is a difference in outcomes when there is no difference. Type 2 errors, also called beta errors, occur when researchers erroneously confirm the null hypothesis. In other words, the study concludes that there is no difference in outcomes between treatment groups when a difference truly exists. Type 1 errors. Statistical testing is used to quantify the likelihood of a type 1 error. A p-value indicates the probability that observed differences between groups might be due to chance alone. In other words, the difference may not be based on the effect of the intervention being tested. The threshold for statistical significance is conventionally set at a p-value of 0.05, signifying that the likelihood of the observed differences being due to chance alone might occur 5 times out of 100 tests. Although a likelihood of 5% falls short of absolute certainty, this level of confidence is generally accepted as scientific proof in use throughout the scientific literature. Type 1 errors can occur when the research question and analysis have not been specified a priori or when multiple statistical tests are performed in a study with several subgroups. 0.41 For example, with a p-value set at 0.05, 1 out of every 20 comparisons will be expected by chance to be deemed statistically significant and be a false positive finding. When more than 20 comparisons are necessary in a given study, a Bonferroni correction or Hochberg sequential procedure can be used to protect against a type 1 error. 0.42, 43. An alternative expression of statistical likelihood is confidence intervals. A confidence interval is a range of values that one can be certain contains the true mean of the population. Confidence intervals can also be defined as showing the range of the observed difference that would be expected if the same study were repeated an infinite number of times. For example, a 95% confidence interval would include the observed difference 95% of the times that the study was repeated. Factors affecting the width of the confidence interval include the size of the sample, the confidence level, and the variability in the sample. When all other factors are equal, a large sample size will tend to produce a better estimate of the population parameter. Many statistical tests can be used to calculate p-values and confidence intervals. The appropriate statistical test must be selected according to several factors. This includes 1. Determining the number of observations in the comparison groups, 2. The number of groups being compared, 3. Whether 2 or more groups are being compared with each other or one group is being compared with itself after some interval of time, 4. What kind of numerical data is being analyzed, e.g., continuous or categorical, 5. Whether the sample is normally distributed, i.e., bell-shaped, or has a skewed distribution, and 6. Whether risk adjustment is required. Although most surgeons are unlikely to fully comprehend all of the nuances of more complex statistical analyses, the majority of surgical outcome studies employ simple designs and statistical tests that are within reach of the non-statistician to interpret. Type 2 errors. Type 2 errors occur in studies where the null hypothesis is falsely accepted. This often arises when the sample size is simply insufficient to detect small but clinically important differences in outcomes. When a study's sample size is too small to detect differences in outcomes between comparison groups, it is said to lack sufficient statistical power. But once a study is complete, no amount of analysis can correct for insufficient statistical power. Before starting a prospective study, researchers should perform a power calculation, which involves determining the minimum size of a meaningful difference in outcomes and then calculating the number of observations required to show that difference statistically. 0.44 Surgeons should be particularly cautious when evaluating studies with null findings, particularly when no power calculation is explicitly reported. Moreover, a post-hoc power analysis can also be helpful with interpreting study results from retrospective studies when no statistically significant effects are found. 0.43 An evidence-based surgeon is wise to remember the adage, no evidence for effect is not necessarily evidence of no effect. Interpreting and applying evidence to surgical practice. Once you are convinced that the observed outcome from a clinical study is the result of the exposure or intervention and cannot be attributed to some alternative explanation, i.e., it is internally valid, then the next challenge to the surgeon is judging the study's external validity. In other words, you must determine whether the findings are applicable to the specific clinical scenario you are facing. Interpreting and applying evidence to surgical practice require a careful assessment of each study's external validity. The assessment of external validity requires attention to core components of a clinical study, including the patient population, the intervention, and the outcomes that were measured. Even evidence derived from a well-designed, prospective RCT may not be valid if the population that was studied is different from the patient groups for which a surgeon is making clinical decisions. For example, consider the well-publicized multi-center randomized clinical trial that was conducted in the Veterans Administration (VA) to compare laparoscopic versus open inguinal hernia repair. 45 The study randomized military veterans who were, on average, older than the non-veteran general population that undergoes hernia repair and concluded that outcomes of open repair are superior to those of laparoscopic repair. But older subjects are more prone to the risks of general anesthesia needed for laparoscopic hernia repair, whereas simple open hernia repair can often be performed using local or minimal alveolar contraction (MAC) anesthesia. In this respect, a surgeon might consider the evidence provided by the RCT applicable to older patients but reserve judgment on the use of laparoscopy to repair hernias in younger, healthier patients. As noted above, subject selection bias can adversely affect the external validity or generalizability of a study's results. Another example of the potential effect of selection bias on generalizability comes from the asymptomatic carotid artery stenosis (ACAS) trial. 46 In this large, prospective randomized trial, enrolled subjects were substantially younger and healthier than the average patient who undergoes carotid endarterectomy (SA). As a result, the observed perioperative mortality rate in the trial was considerably lower than that observed in the general population or even in the very hospitals where the trial was conducted. Although the results of the ACAS trial significantly changed practice, one could argue that the evidence provided by ACAS trial should only be applied to younger patients with asymptomatic carotid stenosis. The external validity of a clinical study can also be dependent upon the surgeon who intends to apply the evidence, along with their experience and expected outcomes. In the VA hernia trial, surgeons had variable experience with the laparoscopic approach, and the trial reported twofold differences in hernia recurrences between surgeons who had done more than 250 cases and surgeons who had less case experience. 45 Surgeons deciding whether the trial evidence supports the use of laparoscopic repair would need to examine their own experience before determining the generalizability of this study to their practices. Furthermore, the surgeon selection process for the ACAS trial mandated that expected SA outcomes for any given surgeon must carry a combined stroke plus mortality rate of is less than or equal to 3.0% for asymptomatic patients. 46 As such, surgeons deciding to perform SA for asymptomatic carotid stenosis based on the trial evidence must also be able to perform this operation with outcomes that are at least as good. The type of outcome measured can also affect the generalizability of clinical studies. Outcomes chosen for clinical studies may be those that are most convenient or most easily quantified and may not be the outcomes of greatest interest to patients. In the VA hernia trial, several outcomes were studied, including operative complications, hernia recurrence, pain, and length of convalescence. Some of the outcome differences favored open repair, whereas some favored laparoscopic repair. The interpretation of the trial evidence for one type of repair versus the other involves implicit value judgments regarding which outcomes are most important and relevant to patients. This issue was also illustrated by findings from the carotid revascularization endarterectomy versus stenting trial, CREST, where patients with carotid stenosis were randomized to either SA or carotid artery stenting. 47 While the study composite endpoint, stroke, death, or myocardial infarction, did not differ between carotid artery stenting and SA, there were still significant differences in individual outcome measures. Patients who underwent carotid artery stenting experienced higher rates of stroke than SA, while patients who underwent CA were found to have a higher risk of myocardial infarction. As such, surgeons applying evidence from CREST to preoperative decisions about method for carotid revascularization must weigh the relative risk of having a postoperative stroke versus a myocardial infarction outcome for an individual patient. Conclusion. The practice of evidence-based surgery relies upon the judicious and systematic application of research evidence to everyday surgical decision-making. With an ever-expanding body of published surgical outcomes and health services research studies, knowing how to interpret the literature becomes increasingly important. Surgeons must be able to appraise the strength of scientific evidence as well as evaluate the quality of research studies before making decisions whether to apply the evidence to their own clinical practice. Consistently applying evidence-based medicine practices will help maintain high-value surgical care.